Hey, and in today's Behind the Music we're looking at A Memory of Us, which is a track I wrote for Viola Untamed. I wanted to show these instruments in a kind of like more contemporary string quartet setting. Something that wasn't too classical, something that wasn't too wild, but something like really gentle and nice to listen to. So what we'll do is play the track the whole way through so you can see exactly what's going on screen, and then we'll take each track as it goes, including like you know, what the live vocals that I've used are and some of the drum samples, as well as kind of like how I've pushed the melodies around with the viola to make use of all of the layers of the improvisations. So let's play the track and then we'll go from there. So as you can hear, it's like a really simple piece, underlying piece. It's just three simple chords that the whole thing's built on. But then I used obviously the strings to really bring alive the whole piece. And what I wanted to do was make a slightly darker string quartet. Normally a string quartet is obviously two violins, a viola and a cello. A quintet would add a bass. But for this I wanted to use two violas, a cello and a bass. So it just bring the whole thing a little bit darker in tone, as well as show off Viola Untamed, obviously. So the piano was the first thing I wrote. So those really simple chords to begin with. It's E flat, G flat and D flat, nothing amazing or like award-winning going on there. It does get a bit more sort of like flavoursome later on. You know, that kind of stuff, like add nines and add 11ths and stuff like that, just to give it a bit more interest. But essentially the whole track's built on those. There is this, in this B theme, it starts to become arpeggiated. Nothing too sort of quantized in this as well. I'm a pianist like naturally, so these were just played in normally. There's obviously some notes that I've shuffled around there because, you know, I'm not the world's greatest pianist, but just to make sure, you know, they were in roughly in time. But I didn't want this to feel like two on the grid. I played this in first without a click to it, and then kind of like worked out the BPM later. That's typically the way I like to work, is just feel the track first and then go, okay, this is roughly what the BPM should be. The piano obviously is alt piano, and there's nothing too crazy I've done with it. It's basically the close and the room mics with a tiny bit of the felt added to the signal just to soften it a little bit to make sure it sits nicely in the track. The viola, let's take the second viola first. So these are just like the lowest velocities to begin with of the improvisations A1, and then it gets a bit more, uses the next sort of like layer of velocities as we go on. The cello is Cello Untamed using A1 improvisations. And that viola and those cello is basically doing the same sort of melody, but just an octave apart. Similar to like a cello and a bass would do in an orchestra, is typically a lot of the time they play an octave apart. Here I just decided let's make the viola and the cello play an octave apart so the bass can do its own thing down here. And then the top viola up here, let's play that just on its own. So using quite a lot of the middle velocities there. So if I play all those together. So that's where these upper velocities really come into their own. Is I would have written this piece to begin with just fairly just like, you know, in the middle velocity range, but then just here on this break, you know, I wanted the music to add an accent. I wanted there to be something different. So without these velocities being up there, it would have sounded great. You know, those velocities sound absolutely fine. The composition sounds great, but I thought let's just accent those. So just drag them up to the velocity range where you're hitting those wild improvisations, and it really adds something to the music. So you wouldn't have thought those wild velocities necessarily would sit in a composition like this, which is supposed to be sort of like quite laid back and gentle, but where you just need those accents and those notes to do something just a bit more impactful. That's definitely where you should experiment with just, okay, let's just try pushing this note into the next velocity range and seeing what happens. The bass is bass untamed, but using the pizzicato articulation. And again, quite loosely played, like nothing snapped necessarily to the grid. I just played this in, pulled a couple of my bum notes around just to make sure they, you know, they fitted in the right, roughly the right tempo. But apart from that, I wanted it to have this sort of like loose feel. And I love the sound of these pizzicato notes where you can hear sort of like some of the buzzing on the fingerboard and things. Sound really, really natural and really, really nice to me. Like there, you can just hear like a little rattle and things. Absolutely great. I'm a big fan of those. So just to play all those together. So you can hear there like the bass is late on some notes, it's early on others. It's just sort of like got this relaxed feel about it. I didn't want it to be too sort of like regimental. And then onto the drums, which is a sample library company called Circles, who are doing these really amazing dry drum samples. And I just played this in on the keyboard to begin with and then just pushed some stuff around. should check them out because they're really, really good. They record stuff to tape and smash it through compressors and just sort of like really make the drum samples that they're capturing sort of like a really aggressive and like, you know, full-on version of themselves. But the drum loop itself is nothing too crazy. It's like this syncopated hi-hat rhythm that I was playing. And I'm not the world's best keyboard drummer, but you know, you get a sense there that, you know, it's quite like a loose drum sound as well. I think there probably would have been a bit more quantization on this just to make them sit right, and then just adding in some extra like crashes and stuff that I, you know, wouldn't have managed to hit at the same time when I was playing them. So yeah, they're really, really good, thoroughly recommended. And then the live vocals. Originally I put this temp vocal in. I knew I wanted something to go in there. So that's not in the track, that was just a temp vocal I found online just to kind of go, let's put that in as a placeholder just to see, you know what it sounds like and give some an idea of what vocals would sound like there. And then I got in contact with Emily, who I've known for a long time. She does absolutely insane backing vocals. Details in the description below if you want to use her, because she's absolutely amazing. Obviously we're doing everything remotely at the moment anyway, but that's kind of like the way she works. She's got this, you know, really, really great voice. I think the microphone she's using is an TLM 103 Neumann microphone, so really high quality stuff. And I kind of just sent her the MP3 as I was nearing the end of the track going, right, I need something, you know, human on this, and what can you do? This is kind of like roughly the thing that I'm after, but like I'd like you to bring your own sort of like spin to the table. Kind of gave her a few like, don't use necessarily any words or anything, and don't go too crazy, but come up with some harmonies, come up with some ideas, and go for it. And originally, you know, I kind of got this bunch of wavs the day after. First of all, I couldn't believe how quickly she turned it around. But then the bunch of wavs that she sent me afterwards was just like all these ideas, all these layers. Let me just pull this down. And I was like, that's absolutely insane. So I'd shoved them all in as quickly as I could and then just played them all just to see what these would sound like. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I was looking for. Obviously way too much, way too like crowded in terms of how many there were. But in terms of like the quality I got and like the ideas, I was like absolutely blown away. So it kind of just, I went through and auditioned every single one of them. I asked her just to send me the raw wavs as well, so no processing and you know, mistakes and everything in there. So I had to do some trimming, you know, where she's taking a breath or taking a breather and those kind of things. I didn't take out too much, but just enough just to polish it up a tiny amount. And then just, you know, what I was left with, I'll just take out what I used eventually. Really insane stuff, like really good. And she sent really nice emails saying, you know, if you want, you know, if you want changes or like, you know, you want to do that back and forth thing, then let's go for it. And I was like, no, you absolutely nailed it. Like, well done. This is exactly what I wanted. And I think that's the testament to hiring really good people, is just let them get on with it. Give them enough constraints that they don't get too carried away, but don't like tie them down too much. Like, tell them where you're going, give them an idea of the picture you're trying to paint, but don't tell them what brush to use, don't tell them what colors to use. Just say, this is kind of like what I'm trying to do, and then let them figure out the way to get there and let them get on with it. And then that's when you end up with amazing results like this. So all testament to her. I was really struggling not to push them like louder in the mix because they were that good, but I was like, no, this is a demo track to sort of like, you know, to try and show off the viola, not like Emily's vocals. But she's done like such a really good job, and I was really happy with them. So let's just talk about the processing that I've used. We'll start with the vocals because that's where we are. Each one of those tracks, I've just put their own compressor on there, just to pull them into shape really. Let's just solo one of them first. So quite a decent amount of compression on there, but that's just to make sure that they are backing vocals and they sit nicely in the mix and there's not too much peaking out. And also all those harmonies as well, sort of like, you know, coming together, and none of them particularly sort of like, you know, compete with each other. They've all got a compressor on there, and then the whole group of them together, I've used Echo Boy, which is an absolute like favorite plugin of mine at the moment. You know, you end up getting your favorites every now and again, which is just this plugin here. So you can hear that like tiny bit of a delay. And that's no secret, like using a really short delay on vocals is something loads of people do just to give them a bit more energy and a bit more life, but it really worked really well here. And then quite a decent amount of EQ as well. Obviously it's quite a high vocal range anyway, but just to make sure there was nothing sort of like competing with the lower end of the track. And then there's a notch that I've taken out of here for some reason, as well as obviously a frequency that was competing with something else. The drums I've done a similar kind of thing to with that effect rack as well. Just use a delay, nowhere near as much on this one. But you can hear that sort of like little bit of a stutter if I take it off. Just gives them a bit more energy and a bit more life. I've also put a really heavy compressor on there as well, just to, this is a vintage VCA compressor that's built into Logic, but it kind of mimics what an SSL compressor does. So quite a fast attack, quite a heavy ratio, 3:1. Just again to make them sit lower in the mix and sort of like, so you can hear them but they're not like peaking out too much. And then the piano, really subtle compressor on here, nothing too crazy. I'm quite a consistent, like, you know, to my own testament, I'm quite a consistent piano player when it comes to velocities, so there wasn't too much I needed to do with these, and it was just to make sure that nothing, you know, too crazy happened. The bass next, it's quite a heavy compressor on this, and that's mainly to make those sort of like those noises that I was talking about on the fingerboard just come alive a little bit more. Oops. This Platinum Digital compressor is quite transparent because I was using it quite heavy. I didn't want it to colour the sound too much, so that's really what this compressor is really good at. And then the violas and the cello, a similar kind of compressor, nothing too much to talk about. Again, just to pull them all into shape so none of them stick out too much and they start to really glue together as a quartet. The reverb, oh, one thing I did with the vocals that I didn't tell you about was basically do quite a lot of panning with them. So like the low ideas that she sent me are panned straight down the middle, and then the mid and the top stuff is kind of like panned left and right, just to pull them away from each other so they feel a bit more like each one of those voices has got its own little space across the speakers. So if I just solo that. Just so they feel like they've each got their own little gap to play around with. And then on the master, I've basically got like this EQ curve, like as a dip there. I think there was some sort of like quite heavy build up of some frequencies around there, just getting rid of a bit of mud, and then a bit of a shelf just to make everything sheen. an overall compressor, which won't be too much. Again, like I say, on this kind of track, you don't want anything to be too like heavily processed. Not in my taste anyway. Like, it's not a pop song, it's not a rock song. You know, you need those internal dynamics to kind of like breathe. And if you pull the ratio too much, you're just going to smash the life out of it basically, and make it feel like too clamped, and there'll be no life in it. So just go gentle with the compression on the end. I think there was a spreader on it, yeah, as well. I think when I listened to this in my car, which has an absolutely terrible stereo in it, but that's really good for listening to mixes that, you know, if they sound good in there, then they'll sound good somewhere else as well. Just a bit of a spreader just to pull out the frequencies a little bit more, and then a limiter as well on the end. Again, really, really gentle, nothing too much happening. So you can just see some of the peaks there are just being pulled, but that limiter's not working the whole time. It's just taking the very peaks of the signal and just pulling them down. With the reverb, I've used, let's pull open the mixer. Two instances. I've got two Pro Rs working. I quite like to do this a lot of the time, is use like a chamber or like a hall sort of like warm setting, and then a plate reverb alongside it at the same time, and just mix them together. So with these two, for the plate reverb, I've just got this one called Pure Plate that's built into Pro R, and then the other one, I was looking through the presets, just kind of like, you know, as you do, just tabbing through them, and then this bright airy chamber for strings preset came up, and I was like, yep, that sounds exactly what I was looking for. That'll do. Put it on, and yeah, it sounded great. I've never used it before, but I'm going to use it again because it sounds really, really good. They're not particularly long, delay times are quite short, but they, to me, they sound really good. And then with the reverb, it's something that I don't do often enough. I normally forget to do it, is just to EQ the reverb. And whether you do the EQ before or after the reverb is like, that's like a topic for another day. I put it afterwards, sounded good to me, so that's where it went. But basically to pull the bottom end out of the signal, so there wasn't too much like heavy reverb build up, because otherwise things can start to sound a bit muddy. And then just listen for any sort of like frequencies in the reverb specifically that peak out. So some reverbs will accentuate more frequency, you know, different frequencies to others. So like a tip for me is just to listen to the reverb buses on their own, and then just play around with the EQ until like that reverb bus just soloed on its own sounds nice, and then when you add it to the mix, hopefully you would think that it's going to sound even nicer. So with the plate one, I added like this high shelf thing and then a low cut, and then with the chamber one, low cut again, but didn't take too much of the high energy out, actually pulled it down. So together, one's like quite a high sheeny reverb, and the other one's a bit more of a warmer reverb. So together they sound really good. So the plate, so one's quite dark and the other one's quite bright, but together they work really well. And then each one of those has just been added, you know, however I see fit to each of the tracks. So that's the whole mixing process. I mean, I'm not the world's greatest mixer by any chance, so if there's stuff that you're seeing in there that I'm doing that you're going, no, that's not the way to do it, it's just the way I've done it, it's not the way to do it, it's just the way I've got to this end result. So that's a caveat for the comments, like, you know, don't hammer me in the comments, this is just the way I've been doing it. So the top tip, apart from just hiring really, really good people and just letting them do exactly what they're good at, and don't get in the way of them doing their job, just like I've done with Emily, hopefully, hope she agrees, is just that push around these velocities with the improvisations. This break here at the top originally was only like half the length that it is now, and that's because the velocities were sort of like down in this this lower section. Whoops. And And I think it was going to end there before it went to the next section, just a little break. But then I was like, well, let's just accent them. Let's just bring those velocities up. I don't think the cello was up that way. I think it was just the two violas. So just the two violas were pushed up. And as I was listening to it, I was like, this can be longer. Like, this can definitely like add like another bar, another 2 bars. And it changed the way the composition worked because the samples were giving me something back that I wasn't expecting. So it's actually changed, you know, the composition changed because I was listening to something new and exciting. And that sounds great to me. Like, you know, the fact that like you can be inspired by writing with something is the best thing, really. It's just like, you know, when you're playing with like a guitar pedal and you're getting a sound out of it that you didn't expect to. That's the same with these. So definitely, like when you've written your composition and you want stuff to like stand out a little bit, don't be afraid to jump, you know, play around with the velocity and get to those extra samples that, you know, in this kind of composition, I wouldn't have thought those wild samples would necessarily work. But I think they definitely have, and they've definitely drawn out something in the music that wasn't there before. So that's it, I think. If there's anything more that you want me to talk about, like drop us a line in the comments and I'll tell you exactly what I've done and how I've got there. But apart from that, like, I really hope you've enjoyed this. If you like this kind of stuff, subscribe because there's more coming, and give us a like if you've got anything useful out of this video whatsoever. But apart from that, hope you're all well, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.